I remember the first time I saw her that day. She was standing at the door, completely calm, as if an entire year hadn't passed, as if she hadn't broken my life, and right then and there I knew this was the beginning of the end. All this time, ever since Sarah just packed a couple of bags and left, saying she was sick of being a servant and needed happiness and peace, I'd been running on fumes. Exactly 1 year and 2 weeks passed before I saw her again. A year during which I, Daniel, a 32-year-old structural engineer with a good salary and reputation, turned into a zombie. Not from grief, no. Because of the twins, Liam and Emma. They're a year and a half now, and they're two small, demanding, but absolutely priceless centers of my world who haven't left me a single minute to wallow in self-pity. I'd get up at 5 in the morning to check blueprints while they slept, and then the daily marathon would begin. Feeding, diaper changes, dressing, playing. By 8, Carol, our nanny, or my sister, Mary, would arrive. I'd rush to work, where I'd try to focus on structural strength calculations, but in reality, my mind was still spinning with whether Liam ate his pumpkin mush and whether Emma fought Carol for the toy giraffe. I didn't think about Sarah. I forced myself not to think. We communicated through my lawyer only for paperwork, and the only thing she demanded was a divorce with no claims to anything. She didn't even ask about the children. It was a blow that, oddly enough, made things easier. The illusion that she had ever been a mother in the true sense of the word vanished. I accepted it as a fact and just focused on giving my children a normal life. I was succeeding. My career was moving up. I was even considering hiring a permanent housekeeper to take some of the load off me. Everything was hard, but it was stable and it was mine. And then, last Sunday, as I was trying to fix a broken riding toy and Liam and Emma were simultaneously attempting to eat my screwdrivers, the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting to see a delivery guy with some latest haul from the online baby store. And I remember the first time I saw her that day. She was standing at the door, completely calm, as if an entire year hadn't passed, as if she hadn't broken my life, and right then and there I knew this was the beginning of the end. Sarah looked not worse, maybe even better. She had a new, trendy haircut and a coat that looked very expensive to me. On her face, not a trace of the tension and fatigue she'd lived with in the months before she left. She just looked at me with this new, unfamiliar confidence. "Hi, Daniel," she said, as if we'd split up yesterday and I'd simply forgotten to call. I couldn't squeeze out a single word. Inside, everything froze and then simultaneously began to burn. I just stood there, holding a greasy wrench, staring at her, feeling the anger I had so carefully buried for a whole year catch in my throat. From behind me, a baby cry rang out, and I realized the children had heard her voice or just saw a stranger. "I came to talk about the kids," she continued, and it was said in such an official, cold tone that it sobered me up. All my rage suddenly turned into icy vigilance. I realized she hadn't come for reconciliation, and certainly not because she was suddenly overcome with maternal feelings. "You should have thought about that a year ago, Sarah." My voice was dry, almost a whisper. I closed the door a little, so she couldn't see Liam and Emma. "I don't have time. They're sleeping right now and I need to work." She smirked. She actually smirked. It wasn't a smile, but that detached, slightly contemptuous movement of the corner of her mouth. "Don't try to pretend you're coping perfectly, Daniel. I know how hard it is. You seem to change nannies all the time." How did she know that? I felt the blood rush to my face. It was unfair. It was low. She left to find her happiness. And now, a year later, she's apparently monitoring my mess just to find an excuse to come back and claim her rights. Rights to what? I opened the door a bit wider to let my sister, Mary, who was about to leave, step out. Mary saw Sarah, and her face turned into a mask of fury. Mary had always been my protector, and she didn't forgive Sarah for running away. "What are you doing here?" Mary asked sharply, standing next to me as if we were both on the firing line. Sarah looked at her with the same contempt. "That's none of your business, Mary. I came to talk to my husband about our children." "Ex-husband," Mary corrected, but I stopped her by putting a hand on her shoulder. I didn't need a shouting match. I needed information. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, looking her straight in the eye, trying to find some hint of pain or regret, but I only saw cold calculation. And that's when she dropped the bombshell that completely confirmed my worst suspicions. I want the children to live with me. I'm prepared to fight for full custody. I am their mother, and I'm not convinced that the conditions they are in their best interest. I can offer them a better future. She said it with such composure that I wanted to just laugh in her face. A better future? The person who abandoned them as infants is now talking about a better future? I knew there had to be something else behind this, because there was no maternal warmth in her voice, only iron will, and I knew she only fought for herself. She always fought only for herself. I was silent for several long seconds. Mary quietly squeezed my arm. I realized this wasn't just a visit. It was the start of a war where my children would be the main pawns. I replied dryly, "Come in, Sarah. Let's talk like adults." I let her into the house, but not into the living room, just my office. I didn't want her to see how organized my life was, how well we were managing with the children. She came to find a flaw, and I wasn't going to give her any leverage. This wasn't a dialogue. It was a reconnaissance mission, and I had to keep a clear head, which was incredibly difficult when the woman you once loved is standing in front of you, and she's here to take away the most precious thing you have. This month promised to be the hardest of my life. I knew it the moment she said the word custody. I led her to the office, shutting the door firmly behind her, leaving Mary in the hall to watch the twins, and the atmosphere in that room instantly became toxic, heavy with all the unsaid words and the year of emotional debt she owed me. I didn't sit down. I stood behind my desk, not to assert dominance, but because I knew if I sat, my hands would be less restrained, and I needed to maintain absolute control over myself. Sarah moved to the chair across from me, the expensive coat draped casually over her arm, and I noticed a slight, almost imperceptible shift in her posture. A kind of studied elegance she never possessed when she was here, struggling with 2 newborns and the overwhelming reality of parenthood. "So, Daniel," she began, her voice steady and pitched low, a tone meant to signify reasonableness. "I want to be clear. This isn't an argument. This is a notification of intent. I am officially initiating proceedings to seek full custody of Liam and Emma." "Notification of intent?" I repeated, the dryness in my throat making the words scrape out. "You walk away, abandon them for a year, don't send a single card, don't make a single call, and now you come back to give me a notification of intent? What changed, Sarah? Did the happiness and peace you were searching for turn out to be more expensive than you thought?" I saw the briefest flicker in her eyes, a muscle twitching near her jaw, but she immediately smoothed her expression back into that cool, almost professional neutrality. This was a new level of control for her, and it made me wary. The old Sarah would have been screaming by now, defensive and tearful. This Sarah was a cold predator. "My situation has stabilized significantly," she stated, ignoring my jab completely. "I have established a good career path in Phoenix. I have my own place, a stable income, and I've been undergoing extensive personal growth. I realized that my previous state of mind was detrimental to everyone, including myself, but now I'm ready. I am their mother, and I deserve the chance to raise them. You are one person trying to juggle a demanding engineering job and 2 toddlers. That is inherently unstable." "Unstable?" I laughed, but it was a bitter sound, devoid of humor. "I have a flexible schedule, the financial means to hire the best help, and I have Mary. They are in a stable home. Their pediatrician is 3 blocks away, and they have never, not once, been left alone or neglected. You know what's unstable, Sarah? A parent who chooses to walk away for 12 months and only returns when their life is stable enough for them to handle the inconvenience." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly, and this was the closest she got to revealing her true frustration. "This isn't about your feelings, Daniel. This is about what a judge will see. A mother who has addressed her issues versus a father who is relying heavily on hired help and his sister. A father who is distracted by a high-stakes career. I will argue that you are the primary provider, not the primary caregiver, and that I can now be both." The sheer audacity of her statement left me momentarily speechless. She was trying to weaponize my success and my effort. She was using the infrastructure I built, the safety net of a good job and supportive family, against me. It was a perfect, calculated move that smelled entirely of legal counsel and not of a desperate, remorseful mother. "Let's cut the nonsense, Sarah," I finally said, my voice dropping. "You don't care about their stability. You barely remember their names. What's the real reason? What do you stand to gain from suddenly wanting custody of children who have just learned how to walk and talk, and whose lives were only just starting to heal after you tore them apart?" She didn't answer the question directly. She simply reached into her expensive bag and pulled out an envelope. "My lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, will be contacting yours by the end of the week. This is an official notice of our intention to file for custody next Monday. We can resolve this amicably, Daniel. We can talk about co-parenting and child support. I am certainly entitled to support from you, given your income. Or we can drag this through the courts and let a judge decide who is the fitter parent." There it was, the word support, not from her to the children, but from me to her. Even veiled as co-parenting, the financial subtext was now impossible to ignore. She hadn't returned because of a sudden wave of maternal love. She had returned because she had found a way to monetize her parenthood. This entire encounter, which lasted barely 20 minutes, had already consumed the emotional energy of a month. After she left, with a final, chillingly indifferent nod, I collapsed into my chair. Mary rushed in, her face a storm cloud. "What did she say, Daniel? Did you kick her out?" She looked smug. I handed her the envelope without a word. "She's lawyered up, Mary. She wants the twins. And she wants the child support that comes with them." The fear that hit me then was a physical punch to the gut. Not the fear of losing money, but the raw, debilitating fear of losing my children to this cold, calculating stranger who now wore the face of their mother. This was not a quick spat. This was going to be a protracted, dirty war, and I had exactly 4 weeks until that first court date she threatened. I knew, looking at the formal legal document in my hand, that every day from now until that moment would be spent in a rising tide of legal stress and personal scrutiny, fighting for the right to continue the life she threw away. The stability I had fought so hard to build was already starting to crumble. The moment Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, followed through and served the official papers on Wednesday, just 2 days after her ambush visit, the clock didn't just start ticking. It became a countdown timer set to explode. My own lawyer, Mark, a family law specialist I hired that very afternoon, was immediately buried in discovery requests. Sarah's legal team was aggressive, demanding a full financial disclosure, a detailed log of the children's activities and care providers for the last year, and, most damningly, a schedule for the next 4 weeks of supervised visits. The stress immediately manifested in the logistics of my life, which, until then, had operated with a precarious, exhausting efficiency. My job at the engineering firm required razor-sharp focus, especially now that we were finalizing a bid for a major municipal project. I was used to pulling 12-hour days, sometimes more, but now every minute was a zero-sum game. The supervised visits were scheduled for the only available hours I had, weekday evenings after work or chunks of time on the weekends that I typically reserved for deep cleaning, grocery shopping, and, crucially, my own attempts at sleep. The first supervised visit was scheduled for that Friday evening at a designated family center. I walked in with Liam and Emma, feeling like I was walking them into a hostile interrogation. The twins, who had just started to recognize and respond to my sister Mary and Carol the nanny, looked utterly confused by this unfamiliar woman who smelled different and used a high-pitched, practiced tone with them. Sarah, under the watchful eye of a social worker, tried to engage them with a large, expensive bag of new toys. Liam, naturally cautious, clung to my leg, while Emma, ever the more adventurous one, grabbed a shiny block, then immediately brought it back to me, preferring my familiar presence to her mother's unfamiliar outreach. Sarah maintained that unnerving composure, her face tight with a determination that wasn't maternal, but competitive. She kept asking the social worker leading questions about the twins' development milestones, clearly trying to gather evidence. I felt physically sick, standing there, realizing that this was my new reality. performing fatherhood under scrutiny while someone actively tried to prove I was failing. The constant tension began eroding my capacity to focus at work. I was existing on 4 hours of broken sleep, waking up in the middle of the night thinking about legal strategy instead of structural load paths. I'd rush out of the house every morning, juggling the twins and my briefcase, always slightly behind schedule. And then, early the following week, the inevitable mistake happened, the kind of catastrophic oversight that only exhaustion can breed. I was finishing up a crucial set of calculations for the project, running on 3 consecutive nights of barely any sleep, stressed from the second supervised visit on Sunday where Sarah had deliberately provoked me with comments about my unhealthy reliance on processed baby food. I had a deadline at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. I dropped the twins off with Carol at 7:30, raced to the office and dove into the work, pulling an absolute all-nighter with coffee and adrenaline. At 9:45 a.m., I sent the finalized schematics to the senior partner for review. At 10:15 a.m., my phone rang. It was Carol, and her voice was tight with fear. "Daniel, where are you?" she asked, and the way she said my name told me everything was wrong. "I'm at the office, Carol. I told you I had the deadline. What is it? Are the kids okay?" "The kids are fine, thank God. But you didn't give me their medication schedule. I just realized. Emma has her ear infection. She needs her antibiotics every 12 hours, and you missed the morning dose." My stomach dropped out entirely. Emma had been fussy the night before, and the doctor had put her back on a 7-day course of amoxicillin. I had packed the lunch bag, the diaper bag, and the folder with instructions for Carol, but in my rush, distracted by the legal drama consuming my brain, I had left the small, crucial bottle of medicine and the dosing chart sitting on the kitchen counter, next to my work laptop. I was supposed to have given it to her at 7 a.m. "I'm so sorry, Carol. I completely forgot. I've been working nonstop. Give it to her right now. It's only an hour late. I'm coming home immediately." I hung up, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. It was an honest, stupid, exhausted mistake, but in the context of a custody battle, it was a weapon handed directly to Sarah's lawyer. I immediately called Mark, my lawyer, and confessed the lapse, and his heavy silence on the other end confirmed my fear. "Daniel, this is bad," Mark stated simply. "She's not going to miss this. If Carol tells anyone, or if Sarah finds out, this goes from a tough custody fight to a serious concern about neglect in the eyes of the court. You need to get home and manage this, but more importantly, you need to be prepared for the fallout." This proves her argument that you're too distracted by your career to provide consistent care. The entire day was ruined. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't even think straight. I had failed Emma because I was too worried about fighting Sarah. The irony was crippling. When I got home that afternoon, Carol was apologetic but stressed. She insisted she hadn't told anyone, but the anxiety was palpable. My mistake wasn't just a physical lapse. It was a huge, gaping hole in the fortress of stability I had built around my children. I spent the evening feeling like a failure, and the following morning, the 3rd supervised visit was scheduled. As I prepared to leave for the center, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from Mr. Jenkins. It was short, formal, and devastating. A request for an immediate, unscheduled home visit by a court-appointed guardian ad litem to assess the children's living conditions. The request cited new information suggesting inconsistent daily care and a potential risk to the minor child's health. She knew. Somehow, she or her lawyer had found out about the missed medication, and this was their first strike. The tension was no longer rising. It had snapped. I had less than 24 hours to prepare for the invasion of my home and the ultimate judgment on my ability to be a father, all because of one tiny, exhausting mistake fueled by the war she started. The email from Mr. Jenkins felt like a punch to the chest, draining all the air out of the week I had barely survived. An unannounced, immediate inspection by a court-appointed guardian ad litem, GAL. They weren't just going to look at my house. They were going to look for any sign of the inconsistent care that resulted in me forgetting Emma's antibiotics. The whole thing was perfectly timed, a direct consequence of that one stupid, exhausted lapse, and it was clear proof that Sarah's team was either watching me closely or someone had talked. I called Mark, my lawyer, Immediately, my voice rough with panic. He tried to sound calm, but I could hear the tension in his own voice. He confirmed that a request like that so soon meant they had compelling, specific information. He ordered me not to clean anything excessively. It would look staged, but to make the house appear as functional and child-friendly as possible. I spent the rest of the evening doing frantic damage control, not by cleaning, but by organizing, sorting through the mountains of toys, making sure every corner looked like a place where a loving, if overworked, father lived, not a neglectful one. The GAL, a stern woman named Mrs. Peterson, arrived the next afternoon. She wasn't friendly, but she wasn't openly hostile either. She was clinically detached, treating my home and my life as evidence in a police file. She spent 45 minutes examining the twins' rooms, the kitchen, the safety gates, and the meticulous logs I kept of their sleep and feeding schedules. She didn't miss a thing. She opened the fridge, peered into the diaper pail, and spent 5 uncomfortable minutes just watching me interact with Liam and Emma, who were, thankfully, in a good mood, blissfully unaware they were being judged. The meeting climaxed in the office, where Mrs. Peterson asked me about my support system. "You rely heavily on Carol, the nanny, and your sister, Mary," Mrs. Peterson noted, her gaze fixed on the notes in her pad. "Given your demanding profession, how do you ensure continuity of care when you are clearly under extreme pressure from the impending custody proceedings?" I started to explain how I'd rearranged my work schedule, how Mary had stepped up even more, and how I was prioritizing the children. But then she cut me off with a question that felt like a trapdoor opening beneath me. "I understand that one of the caregivers recently expressed concern regarding a lapse in administering necessary medication to Emma. Can you confirm that this event occurred, and if so, who reported it to whom?" My heart hammered against my ribs. There it was. They knew. "Yes, that happened," I admitted, forcing myself to look her in the eye. "I made a mistake, ma'am. I was severely sleep-deprived from pulling an all-nighter to meet a critical deadline, and I left her bottle of amoxicillin on the counter. It was given an hour late. I immediately notified my attorney, and I took steps to ensure that error will never be repeated. It was an isolated incident fueled by stress, not a pattern of neglect." Mrs. Peterson just nodded slowly, jotting something down. I watched her hand, trying to read the verdict in her pen strokes. She then switched gears, pivoting back to the financial aspect, which I still suspected was the true motive for Sarah's return. "Regarding your ex-wife, Sarah, her legal filing indicates she has secured a new, high-paying position that affords her the financial stability to provide for the children independently. Is that your understanding?" "I have no idea what she's doing in Phoenix," I answered honestly. "When she left, she said she was done being a mother. I am skeptical that she is doing this for anything other than financial gain, frankly. My income is substantial, and she is clearly entitled to a large sum of child support if she gains custody." Mrs. Peterson gathered her papers. "That's all for now, Mr. Campbell," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I will be conducting a parallel interview with Sarah this week." The emotional hangover from that visit lasted 2 days. The following evening, after putting the twins to bed, I was scrolling through the local Arizona job market on a whim, trying to confirm Sarah's high-paying position, when I stumbled across something that made the blood run cold. I found her name listed on the corporate website of a major real estate firm in Phoenix, but not as an executive or even a manager. She was listed as an administrative assistant. A decent job, yes, but certainly not the kind of high-paying position that would allow her to provide for the children independently, as her lawyer claimed. And then I saw it. The plot twist. Scrolling further down the executive team page, my eyes landed on the photo and bio of the firm's senior managing partner, a wealthy, older man named Robert Henderson. And beneath his official photo, I saw a casual, slightly blurry picture of him with his arm around a woman, taken at a charity gala, clearly posted on the firm's community involvement page. The woman was Sarah, and the text below the photo mentioned that they were newly engaged. It suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. A perfect, vile mosaic of greed. Sarah hadn't returned because she suddenly got a high-paying job. She had returned because she was about to marry a very rich man and she needed to establish custody of the twins before the wedding. Why? Because an engagement to a wealthy partner would drastically change the court's perception of her financial stability, making her a much stronger candidate for custody. But more importantly, a large part of what she was fighting for, the massive child support payments from me, would look suspiciously like an attempt to leverage my income to fund her new luxurious life with Robert. If she gained custody now, before the wedding, the court would assess my large income against her current, administrative assistant, income, awarding her maximum support. If she waited until after the wedding, Robert's immense wealth could be factored in, potentially reducing or eliminating the need for me to pay support at all, maybe even requiring her to pay me. She wasn't fighting for the children's best interest. She was fighting for a maximum financial settlement for me to take into her marriage with Robert. I stared at the screen, a chilling mixture of fury and calculated focus washing over me. This wasn't just about custody. It was about fraud and extortion, leveraging my children for a huge payout. I had found the main secret, the real reason for her sudden, aggressive return. And now I had the information I needed to fight back, but I had to move fast, before her wedding solidified her financial position. The confrontation, the final, desperate battle, was coming. I didn't sleep that night after finding the picture of Sarah and Robert Henderson. The truth, when it finally hit, wasn't a sudden shock but a slow, cold realization that everything she had done, the sudden, aggressive custody claim, the expensive lawyer, the manufactured instability argument, was pure, calculated financial leverage. She was using Liam and Emma as an annuity, a prenuptial bargaining chip to secure a massive stream of support payments from me before she married into genuine wealth. The timing of the wedding, the low-level administrative job, the fabricated claims of financial independence. It all clicked into a pattern of breathtaking cynicism. The next morning, I was in Mark's office before the sun was fully up. I slid the printouts, Sarah's job title, the engagement announcement, the picture with Robert, across his enormous mahogany desk. He picked them up, his usual professional detachment giving way to a look of utter surprise and then grim satisfaction. "She's getting married to this guy?" Mark asked, tapping the picture. "When?" "The wedding date isn't public, but the engagement post is only a week old. She's moving fast, Mark. She needs this resolved before she becomes Mrs. Henderson and the court sees her as having access to his wealth. That's why the pressure, the jail visit, the aggressive timeline. She needs to establish the child support amount based on her current income versus my high income, which would be enormous. Then she takes that payment stream into her new marriage." Mark nodded, already buzzing with tactical energy. "This changes everything, Daniel. We pivot immediately. This isn't about fitness anymore. This is about motive and misrepresentation. We file an emergency motion for a discovery hearing, compelling her to fully disclose her financial prospects, including any prenuptial agreements and this specific engagement. We frame it not as a personal attack, but as an essential element to determine the children's best interests and to prevent potential fraud against the court." The emotional crescendo arrived 3 days later during that emergency hearing. It wasn't the dramatic courtroom scene you see in movies, but a small, windowless conference room where a judge presided, and where the air was thick with unspoken hostility. Sarah was there, perfectly dressed, sitting next to Mr. Jenkins, who looked supremely confident until Mark stood up. Mark didn't waste time. He bypassed the recent lapse in medication, that small, crippling mistake I made, and went straight for the jugular. He introduced the evidence. The administrative assistant job, the engagement announcement, and the details of Robert Henderson's vast wealth. He didn't just ask about her stability. He asked about her motivation for such an aggressive, last-minute custody fight before solidifying her financial future with a millionaire. Mr. Jenkins objected repeatedly, calling it irrelevant character assassination, but the judge was already interested, leaning forward, realizing the entire context of the case had just shifted from parental fitness to potential financial maneuvering. Then Mark delivered the final, crushing blow. He produced a bank statement, obtained through a quick, specific subpoena, showing a recent, massive wire transfer into Sarah's account. A down payment on a new condo in Phoenix, purchased days after her engagement was announced, and co-signed by Robert Henderson. "Your Honor," Mark concluded, his voice unwavering, My client submits that Ms. Campbell's current custody petition is not driven by renewed maternal desire but by an attempt to weaponize the child support system, seeking to collect maximum payments from Mr. Campbell to fund a lavish new lifestyle, entirely misrepresenting her true financial trajectory. Sarah's composure finally shattered. She hadn't screamed or cried. She had done something worse. She turned and glared at me with a hatred so pure and focused it felt like a physical assault. The mask was gone. The cold calculation was replaced by raw, humiliated fury. In that single look, I saw confirmation of every terrible suspicion I'd harbored for the last year. It wasn't about the kids. It was always about the money. The judge called a recess. When the court reconvened, the decision wasn't a final verdict on custody, but a decisive victory for me in the short term. The judge ruled that given the evidence of Sarah's immediate, undisclosed financial change, her current petition was effectively tainted. He immediately suspended the supervised visitation schedule and ordered a full, comprehensive financial investigation into both her and Mr. Henderson's assets, freezing the custody proceedings until the motive was clear. The judge's words echoed in my mind as we left. The court will not be used as a vehicle for personal financial enrichment under the guise of parental rights. It was over, at least for now. We had bought time, and the immediate threat of her taking the children was gone. The pressure on her to settle was now immense, knowing that the longer this dragged out, the more likely the court was to see the true nature of her plan. Later that week, I received a call from Mr. Jenkins. His tone was completely different, defeated, conciliatory. Sarah was withdrawing her immediate custody petition. She was requesting to revert to the original, uncontested divorce terms, which meant I retained full custody, and she would agree to minimal, supervised visits in the future, conditional on full financial disclosure. She didn't want the financial investigation to proceed. The cost of exposing her entire scheme was simply too high. I hung up, feeling relief, yes, but no triumph. I looked over at Liam and Emma, who were currently trying to pull the cushions off the sofa. They were safe. They were oblivious. The battle had been won not because I was a perfect father. I had my flaws, my exhaustion, my single near-catastrophic mistake, but because her motive was impure, and mine, however imperfect, was rooted in genuine love and protection. The whole nightmare, from the knock on the door to the withdrawal of the petition, took just under 3 weeks. It was a terrifying, compressed course in human betrayal and resilience. I had saved my children, not just from being moved, but from becoming props in their mother's avaricious scheme. But even as I watched them play, a profound, lingering sadness remained. I didn't hate Sarah anymore. I pitied her. She had chosen a life of calculated transactional gain over the only genuine, unconditional love she could have ever known. She had traded her children, 2 vibrant, joyful souls, for a condo and a rich husband. And I knew that while I had won the fight for custody, Liam and Emma had lost something irreparable. The chance to ever truly know the mother who put a price tag on them. And that realization, heavy and unshakable, was the only thing I was left with.